The candlemaker's cottage. The rain had been falling since just before dusk, soft and steady against the slate roof of the cottage. It made a delicate rhythm on the windows, as if nature itself were whispering a lullaby. Inside, the candlemaker moved quietly, her steps cushioned by worn woolen rugs and the warmth of routine. She had lived in the cottage for more than 40 years, and not once had she rushed. Every task had its time, its season, its rhythm. Tonight was no different. The wick cutters rested beside a tray of beeswax tapers, still warm from the mold. She dipped her fingers in a bowl of lavender water and breathed in deeply. The scent rose gently, mingling with the faint aroma of melted wax and dried herbs that hung from the ceiling beams. Bundles of rosemary and chamomile swayed slightly as the wind touched the old windows. She moved through the kitchen without sound, her slippers barely whispering against the floorboards. On the wooden counter sat a row of finished candles, each one poured and cooled with care. She lit one, and the flame caught icily, a small flickering dance of gold in the dim room. The glow wrapped around her like an old friend, casting soft light on the stone walls and the brass teapot waiting on the stove. Outside, the rain deepened, softening the edges of the world. The trees beyond the garden blurred into shadow, their leaves rustling in the hush. She paused by the window, hands wrapped around a warm mug, and watched droplets race down the glass, each one following a quiet, unknowable path. The candlemaker's world was small by choice. Beyond the garden gate lay the village, but she rarely visited. Everything she needed was here: firewood, wax, herbs, silence. The only visitors were the occasional fox in the lane or the sound of the river whispering through the trees at night. She returned to her work table, where rows of molds waited to be filled. The wax, golden and clear, sat in a clay pot beside the hearth. She stirred it slowly, watching as it swirled and caught the light. Each motion was measured like a ritual she had long since memorized. From the shelf above, she selected a small bottle of bergamot oil and added just a drop. The scent drifted into the air, warm and citrusy, a promise of calm. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed in the quiet. Outside, the rain never stopped. It didn't need to. A cat, old and grey, curled in a basket near the fire. He opened one eye as she passed, then closed it again, unconcerned. The room glowed steadily now, lit only by the fire and for gently burning candles. Shadows flickered on the walls, dancing with the wind. She poured the first mold with steady hands. The wax filled each chamber slowly, without rush or spill. The cottage smelled of honey and earth and comfort, a scent that held memories, the kind that didn't shout, but lingered quietly, like footprints on soft soil. She set the filled molds aside and wiped her hands on a linen cloth folded just so. Then she crossed to the bookshelf near the door. Her fingers brushed past worn spines until they found the right one, a leather-bound journal. Pages soft and yellowed from time. She sat by the fire, journal on her lap, and began to write. Not in sentences, not in stories, just thoughts. Scattered like petals, the way the rain sounded tonight, the scent of melting wax, the way the wind sighed when it passed the chimney. Small, gentle things. Her handwriting was careful, each letter formed with patience. There was no need to remember everything, only to mark the softness of this moment. Later, when sleep came, it would come easily, like a wave returning to shore. But for now, the quiet held her. The fire cracked softly, a single log settling in the grate. Sparks danced up for a heartbeat, then faded. She looked over at the cat, still curled, still dreaming. In that stillness, the world felt perfectly in place, not grand or exciting, just full and calm. In the corner stood a tall cabinet with narrow drawers. Each drawer held something different: dried petals, pieces of string, beeswax sheets, tiny bottles of essential oils. She opened one at random just to smell the contents, and smiled. Clove and cedar. She used to keep notes in the drawers, little slips of parchment tied with ribbon SPs, old requests, words she liked the sound of. Over time, the ribbons faded, the paper curled, but she never threw them away. They felt like part of the room now, woven in. As she closed the drawer, a distant owl called once, low and steady from the trees beyond the garden. She paused, listening. Not for any reason, just to listen. That was her way always, leaving room for silence, for sound, for whatever the night might bring. She returned to the table where the molds were cooling, their wax beginning to cloud. She ran a finger along the edge of one, checking the set. Still warm, still patient, like everything here. Nothing rushed in this cottage. Nothing needed to. The teapot let out a soft breath of steam, reminding her it was ready. She poured herself a cup and cradled it in both hands. The warmth was immediate, deep. It seemed to reach through her palms and into her chest. A simple comfort, a kind one. She carried the cup to the window seat and settled into the cushions. The rain still fell, steady as a metronome. She sipped slowly, her breath matching the rhythm of the drops. Outside, the garden blurred in the mist. Inside, the world stayed still. She thought, not for the first time, about how lucky she was to live in a place where quiet was allowed, where slowness wasn't wasteful but sacred. She had built this life one moment at a time, and each one had shaped the next like river stones smoothed by water. The shelves across from her held jars, some clear, some frosted, each labeled in her hand, each with a past. Cinnamon bark, rose hips, dried lemon peel. She could remember the day she gathered most of them. The sun, the season, the feeling in her chest. The candle beside her flickered gently, casting light upward onto the window pane. Her reflection blurred in the glass, layered with the rain outside. It made her look younger somehow, or maybe just softer, like someone in the middle of a dream. She thought of the candles she'd made over the years, thousands, maybe more. Some for weddings, some for grieving, some for the sheer comfort of light. Each one held a kind of stillness inside it, a moment captured in scent and shape and fire. Now and then she received letters from those who'd bought them, notes written in sleep-soft ink saying thank you, saying the candle had made the night less heavy. She never expected them, but always kept them stacked neatly in a wooden box by her bed. She placed the empty teacup on the windowsill and let her hands rest in her lap. The fire, the rain, the candlelight, they were enough. She didn't need music or voices or clocks. The evening unfolded on its own, the way night always does when left alone. From the far end of the room, the grandfather clock gave a low, steady chime. Not loud, not jarring, just enough to mark the hour. She didn't check the time. It didn't matter. Time here wasn't kept in minutes, but in quiet and warmth and breath. She rose and moved toward the hallway, her hand brushing the doorframe as she passed. In the hall were framed sketches, her mother's hands drawing herbs, her father's pressed flowers, small moments caught and honored. The walls held memory like skin holds touch. Her bedroom was dim, lit only by one candle and the glow from the hearth beyond. The bed was already turned down, layered in thick quilts and soft linen sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. The window beside it was open just a crack to let the night in. She stood there for a while, not hurrying, just watching the shadows dance across the floor, listening to the familiar creaks of the cottage settling for the night. Everything had its place. Everything was at rest. Even the air seemed to sleep here. She slipped off her shawl and hung it on the wooden hook beside the door. The wool was still warm from her shoulders. It would be ready for the morning, waiting without asking. Like everything in the cottage, it knew the rhythm of her days. By the bedside table sat a small, round tin. Inside, a bomb she made herself lavender and beeswax and a touch of chamomile. She opened it, rubbed a bit onto her wrists and temples. The scent, soft and familiar, felt like a slow sigh inside her chest. She eased into bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The cat had already settled into his usual place near her feet, a faint rumble of purring rising and falling like waves. She reached over and extinguished the candle. The darkness was complete, but not empty. Beyond the window, rain tapped its fingers on the glass. A breeze curled into the room like a quiet guest, brushing her cheek. The sounds of the night soft, honest ancient trapped around her, as real and present as the mattress beneath her and the warmth above. Her breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the rain. In her mind there were no to-do lists, no questions, just the steady knowing that this day had been enough. The wax was poured, the tea was warm, the pages written, her quiet world complete. Sleep didn't rush her. It never had. It arrived gently, like fog rolling over hills, softening the edges, quieting the distance. She let her thoughts become less like words and more like light, flickers, feelings, shadows without weight. She pictured the candle flame still burning in the other room, though she knew she'd blown it out. Somehow, in her mind, it stayed steady and golden, like a watchful presence that would keep the night safe while she rested. Memories rose without effort, her mother's hands tying herbs with string, her father's laugh echoing across the field behind the cottage, the first candle she ever poured. Not in order, not sharp, just warm things floating just beneath the surface of sleep. The purring at her feet slowed. Even the cat had begun to dream. Somewhere outside, the wind stirred the garden gate, making it knock softly once, then fall still. It was a sound she'd heard countless times. It always came before dreams. And so, in a room wrapped in warmth and quiet, she let herself drift. The breath slowed, the body softened, the thoughts faded. In a world that often demanded noise, she had chosen the luxury of stillness, and in that stillness she slept. The rain fell through the night, sometimes heavier, sometimes light, but never stopping. It became part of the walls, part of the roof, part of her sleep. Outside, the world turned under clouds and moonlight, while inside, the candlemaker dreamed in peace. She dreamed of warm wax, poured in sunlight, of flower fields behind the cottage, bees drifting lazily from bloom to bloom, of the scent of rosemary in her hair and flower on her apron. Nothing wild, just memories softened by time. In her sleep, the clock ticked on. The fire sank lower. The coals glowed in the hearth, their warmth slowly fading but still enough. And the cat, tucked against her feet, shifted once and returned to his small, quiet dreams. The village lay still in the valley below, its chimneys breathing mist into the air. Few lights remained in the windows, a hush blanketed everything, and only the wind moved, threading its way through branches and chimneys like a lullaby. In the cottage, peace held its shape. The candle moulds had cooled. The room no longer smelled of wax, but of sleep and wood smoke. And as the candle maker slept, the night held her gently, without hurry, without thought, just the weight of rest. Hours passed quietly, measured only by the slow dimming of the fire and the deepening stillness of night. Nothing interrupted the silence. Even the rain seemed to listen, falling with gentler steps, as if not to disturb the dreams within. Just before dawn, the clouds began to thin, and a pale light pressed softly at the edges of the horizon. The village rooftops glistened with rain, and mist rose from the fields in long, curling ribbons that drifted without direction. In the cottage, the candlemaker stirred, not awake, not yet, but somewhere between sleep and waking. Her body stayed still, but her breath shifted, touched faintly by the whisper of morning approaching on the other side of the glass. The fire had gone out. The last of the coals nestled beneath a layer of ash, their heat only a memory now, but the warmth remained in the walls, in the floor, in the quilts tucked close around her. Everything she needed was already here. She did not rush to rise. Morning could wait. In her world there was no alarm, no deadline. Only the slow return of light, the promise of a new day, and the knowledge that she would wake into it gently, as she had every day before, with quiet and peace. Eventually, her eyes opened not wide, just enough to see the soft glow of morning against the far wall. The rain had stopped. In its place was the sound of wet leaves brushing in the wind, and the faint call of a bird waking somewhere in the trees. She lay there for a moment longer, her body still heavy with sleep, her mind quiet. The cat lifted his head, blinked once, then nestled back into the folds of the blanket. No need to rise quickly. The day would unfold like the last and rushed kind, full of light. When she finally stood, the floor beneath her feet was cool but familiar. Her shawl waited by the door, and the kettle, though empty, held the shape of the morning's first task. Her hands, aged but steady, reached for it with silent grace. She would light the fire again, pour the wax, watch the steam curl from her tea, and later, when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the cottage floor, she would pour more candles, write in her journal, and prepare once more for rest. This was her life, measured not in noise, but in stillness, in scent and shadow, in the glow of a single flame against stone walls, and in that quiet world the candlemaker lived and worked, and slept trapped always in the gentle rhythm of peace. The bridge over the river Lune. The bridge has stood for centuries. Its stones, weathered and worn, bore the marks of time, yet never once had it faltered. It curved gently over the water, just wide enough for one cart or two people walking slowly side by side, but most evenings it held only silence. The river below moved without rush, always in motion but never in a hurry. It shimmered beneath moonlight and whispered over smooth rocks, its voice quiet and thoughtful, like someone lost in a gentle memory. The trees that lined its banks leaned close, their reflections trembling in the current. At night, the bridge became a resting place for quiet thoughts. Those who crossed it rarely spoke. They slowed their steps, listening to the water, breathing in the cool air that drifted up from the riverbanks. Some paused in the middle, not to look, just to feel. An old lantern hung from a rusted hook near the center of the bridge. It hadn't held a flame in years, yet somehow it still glowed faintly when the moon was full. Locals said it remembered not with light, but with presence, as if it had listened to enough stories to shine on its own. Tonight, a light mist had settled over the village, softening the world. The air was damp and cool, scented faintly with river moss and distant lavender. Leaves drifted down from the trees, slow and silent, landing on the water and floating away without a sound. Footsteps approached soft, steady, unhurried. A man in a long wool coat appeared at the edge of the bridge. His face was lined not with worry, but with time. He came here often, though not to meet anyone. The bridge, the river, they were company enough. He paused near the center, resting his hands on the stone railing. Beneath him, the river flowed like memory, always moving, always familiar. He didn't speak, but the silence around him seemed to lean in gently, like an old friend listening without expectation. In the distance, the village lights blinked through the mist-soft halos behind glass windows. The man's cottage was among them, but not yet calling. He stayed where he was, letting the sound of water carry his thoughts to quieter places. He remembered being here as a boy, long before the stones were this smooth. He'd run across barefoot in summer, or sit at the edge, tossing pebbles, trying to guess where they'd land. The river had been a friend then, too patient, steady, unchanged. A breeze moved gently through the trees. The mist swirled in little spirals across the bridge. He pulled his coat tighter, but didn't shiver. The night held no threat here, only stillness, only the kind of quiet that settles in the heart when nothing is required of it. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the breeze touch his face. It carried with it the scent of river stones, cool grass, and something floral he couldn't name. Maybe from a garden nearby, or maybe just something the water remembered from another place. The moon had begun its slow rise above the treetops, casting a silver sheen across the river's surface. It shimmered like brushed silk, rippling with the current. Small fish darted beneath, their movements creating quiet patterns just below the light. A single leaf landed near his shoe, spinning slowly before settling. He watched it without thought, his mind quiet. He didn't need answers here. On the bridge, questions felt less urgent. The river didn't solve anything, it simply listened and moved on. Behind him, the path led back to the village. Ahead, the road curved into open fields, where fireflies sometimes danced in the taller grasses. He had walked both many times. Tonight, he chose neither. He simply stayed, letting the bridge hold him a while longer. The stone beneath his hands was cool and smooth, worn down by time and touch. He wondered how many others had stood where he stood, now thinking, remembering, maybe even letting go. The bridge kept no record. It only offered its quiet space. Some nights he brought a thermos of tea and sat on the low wall, sipping slowly while the river spoke below. But tonight he had come with only his coat, his breath visible in the cool air and the soft company of mist and moonlight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, stone-smooth flat. the kind perfect for skipping. He didn't throw it, just turned it between his fingers, feeling its weight, its shape. A simple thing, real, grounding, like the bridge itself. Far downstream, a pair of ducks glided silently across the surface, their shapes barely visible. They moved without rush, making no sound but leaving soft ripples behind them. He watched them disappear into the shadows without a word. His breath slowed. The rhythm of the water seemed to guide it. In, out, just like the river, just like time. He had no destination tonight, and the night demanded nothing. It only offered its presence, its quiet, and a place to rest for a while. He let the stone slip from his fingers. It landed near the center of the river with a gentle plunk, sending rings outward that shimmered in the moonlight. The sound was small, but satisfying, a simple act of release, of trust in the flow. The ripples faded. The river resumed its quiet song, unchanged and unbothered. The man smiled faintly, not because of anything in particular, but because peace has a way of blooming gently when nothing is asked of it. In the branches above, a bird shuffled in its sleep, feathers rustling softly. The night held everything motion and stillness. Memory and now-and wove them together like a lullaby for the waking and the dreaming alike. He glanced once more down the path toward the village. A soft yellow glow shone from one cottage window. Someone else was awake, perhaps with a book or a cup of something warm. He liked knowing others found quiet in their own way. Still, he lingered. The bridge had always felt like a pause in time, a space between destinations, between decisions, but here the pause wasn't empty, it was full of water and stone and breath, full of being without doing. A gentle ache in his knees reminded him it was time to move, not because he had to, but because the night would carry on whether he stayed or not. He patted the stone railing once a small goodbye turned toward the path home. His footsteps were soft on the damp stone, barely rising above the hush of the river. Behind him, the bridge stood as it always hadn't moved, unchanging, quietly watching the world slip by beneath its arches. As he walked, the mist began to lift slightly, revealing more of the field beyond and the silver-threaded stream that wandered beside it. The stars peeked through gaps in the clouds, blinking gently like sleepy eyes. He thought about how many nights like this he had lived through, and how few he had truly noticed. This one he would remember, not for any great reasons, just for the way the air smelled, the way his thoughts had softened, the way stillness had found him. When he reached the end of the path, he turned once more to glance at the bridge. It was barely visible now, half hidden in the lingering mist, but he knew it was there. It always would be, steady, waiting, like a friend who never left. With quiet steps, he made his way back toward the glow of the village. The sound of the river faded slowly behind him, replaced by the creak of his gate and the hush of the world tucking itself in for sleep. His door opened with a familiar sound, hinges sighing in a way that felt almost like welcome. He stepped inside, hung his coat by the fire, and stood for a moment in the stillness. The warmth of the room met him like an embrace. He lit a single candle and placed it on the windowsill. Its glow flickered gently, casting soft light on the glass. Beyond it, the bridge was no longer visible, but the river's quiet song echoed faintly in his ears, as though he'd brought it with him. Without rushing, he moved through the evening's final tasks. A cup of warm water, a folded blanket, the gentle brushing of teeth. He did each one slowly, like a ritual, simple gestures that prepared his body for rest and his mind for quiet. He settled into bed, the covers pulled up to his chest, the room lit only by the candle in the window. Outside, the mist had thinned, and the moon shone clearly now, its light soft as silk across the rooftops of the sleeping village. With eyes half closed, he thought once more of the bridge, of its silence, its strength, and its gift of stillness. And as his breath deepened, his thoughts drifted, like the river itself, soft, slow, and steady toward sleep. Dreams came like soft footsteps across the bridge light, unhurried, full of quiet images. He saw the river under stars, the lantern glowing faintly, the mist curling round his ankles like silk. No words, just warmth, just rest. Outside, the candle in the window flickered once, then settled into a steady flame. Its light was small but sure, like the memory of a peaceful walk or the sound of water remembered long after it's gone. The bridge stood in the dark, unchanged. It held no opinion, no purpose beyond what others gave it. Yet still, it remained a place to pause, to reflect, to listen. And in doing so, it offered something rare, the permission to simply be. The village slept, the river flowed, the night unfolded in its quiet rhythm, and the man slept within it, gently carried by everything he had heard, everything he had felt, and the endless, soothing current of the river Lune. And as the moon watched over water and stone, the bridge waited without hurry, without need its arches patient, its silence complete, holding the dreams of those who had crossed, and the stillness of those who simply stood and listened. The old mill's silent gears, the old mill stood where the river bent, tucked behind a row of tall reeds and wildflowers. Its wheel, once turning with the current, now rested still moss-covered and softened by years of rain and sun. No grain had passed through in decades. Inside, time had gathered in layers dust on beams, cobwebs in corners, the faint scent of old wood and oil long since dried. Yet the mill wasn't abandoned. It had simply learned how to sleep. And someone still came to visit it, almost every evening. Her name was Elsie. She had lived in the village her whole life, and the mill had been her first job when she was barely tall enough to reach the grain sacks. Now in her 70s, she still walked there each evening, steps slow but certain. She carried a small oil lamp, though she rarely lit it. The light from the setting sun usually spilled in through the broken slats, casting gold ribbons across the old floorboards and turning the dust into drifting, lazy stars. The door creaked the same way it always had, its hinges groaning softly in greeting. Elsie stepped inside and closed it gently behind her, as if not to wake the building. She moved with quiet familiarity, brushing her hand along the worn wooden wall. A stool waited near the window, just where she'd left it the night before. She sat without a sound, her hands resting in her lap. Outside, the river still flowed, brushing past the wheel with a hushed murmur, as though remembering how it used to turn. Elsie didn't come to fix or to change. She came to be still. The mill, long ago retired, had become a sanctuary not for work, but for quiet. Its silence wasn't empty. It was layered, rich with memory. You could feel it in the beams, the floor, the light. She looked up at the rafters where swallows once nested. Their nests still clung to the beams, though no wings filled the air now. The quiet was different than silence. It had texture like a well-worn quilt, soft, layered, known. Her eyes traced the gears high on the wall-giant teeth that once groaned and turned, powered by the river's steady push. Now they held still like old bones at rest. She didn't mind. She found peace in their stillness, in knowing they had done enough. Reaching into her coat pocket, she pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside it, a slice of bread, still warm, and a folded napkin. She never ate much, just a few slow bites, savoring the moment. The meal made everything taste like memory. As she chewed, she listened not for voices or music, but for the language of wood and wind. The old beams creaked softly as the air shifted. The river whispered just beyond the walls, and the mill, though still, seemed to breathe in its own way. She remembered the rhythm of it, all the wheel turning, belts humming, grain tumbling into sacks. Even now she could feel it in her bones, that deep, grounded cadence, not loud, not chaotic, just the simple, honest music of work. After finishing her bread, she tucked the cloth away and stood. Her fingers reached out, brushing the edge of the great gear nearest to her. It was cool to the touch, dust clinging to her skin. She didn't clean it. That dust belonged here. She walked slowly to the back wall, where the control panel still stood levers and knobs frozen in place. Sometimes she imagined flipping them, hearing the thrum of life return. But she never did. The silence had become its own kind of motion. Outside, the light shifted. The last of the sun threaded through the cracks in golden streaks, pooling across the floor like spilled honey. Elsie stood in it, letting the warmth touch her hands, her face, her shoulders an evening blessing. She moved to the loft stairs, each one familiar beneath her feet, though they creaked louder than they used to. At the top was the old ledger table, still covered in yellowed paper and a single feather quill left as if waiting for one more entry. She ran a hand over the tabletop, her fingers tracing faint pencil marks and flower stains. This was where she once tallied the weight of grain, the names of neighbors, the quiet numbers that had built lives and kept winters warm. Elsie pulled over the old stool, its seat worn smooth by decades of use. She sat with a sigh, not of sadness, but of return. This place knew her. Even in silence, the mill felt like it remembered, and she remembered too gently, not painfully. From this high perch, she could see the old chute that once carried flour down into waiting sacks. Now it held only dust and light, but she could picture the clouds of fine powder, the way they hung in the air like ghostly lace. A breeze slipped in through a crack in the roof, brushing her cheek. It carried the scent of river water, aged timber, and dry earth. Not fresh, but familiar like pages of a well-read book, or the folds of an old blanket. She closed her eyes, letting her breath match the slow rhythm of the place. Inhale with the wind, exhale with the settling wood. No clocks here, no ticking, just the soft, natural movement of a place long past urgency. Somewhere below, a floorboard shifted, likely from the weight of a small animal or the settling of the structure. She smiled at the sound. The mill wasn't emptied, was simply quiet. Quietness, she'd learned, was not the same as loneliness. She stood again, her knees creaking like the stairs beneath her. She didn't mind. The creaks were just another part of the music. She made her way down slowly, hand brushing the rail worn smooth by years of careful descent. Back on the ground floor, the golden light had faded to blue. Evening had arrived fully, and the world outside had softened. The river's voice grew more distinct now, as other sounds hushed to let night take its place. She sat again by the window, where the fading light painted long shadows across the floor. The trees across the water swayed gently, their reflections rippling in soft silver waves. This was her favorite part of the Datha, hush between light and dark. This was when memory felt clear as snot, sharp but present, not demanding but soft. The faces of those she'd worked beside returned to her in flickers, smiles over steaming mugs, laughter lost in grain dust, hands steady on levers and sacks. The mill had been alive once, not just with machines, but with people. Voices had echoed here, boots had scuffed these floors, and songs had been hummed over the din. She could still hear them if she sat quietly long enough. She didn't long for those days, not exactly. They had passed, and she had let them, but there was comfort in their footprints, in the way the walls held echoes. The mill hadn't forgotten, and neither had she. It was enough to sit and remember. From her coat pocket, she drew out a small tinned round and dented from years of use. Inside were bits of lavender and chamomile, dried with care. She opened the lid and let the scent drift into the room, soft and earthy and soothing. She placed the tin on the sill beside her, a gift to the space, not in ceremony, just in gratitude, for the quiet, for the remembering, for the stillness that allowed her to feel whole even in silence. The mill received it without question. Outside, the first stars began to appear, just a few, blinking through the deepening blue. The river reflected them unevenly, little flecks of light caught in motion. She watched them like one watches a fire without needing reason. A soft sound stirred behind the wall, perhaps a mouse or the creak of an old board adjusting to night air. She didn't startle. The mill spoke in these little ways. It had always been a place of movement, even in its resting. She leaned back in the chair, letting her shoulders drop and her breath slow again. Her hands folded in her lap, one thumb tracing slow circles against the other. The rhythm soothed her, simple and quiet, like the turning of the wheel that once was. The light dimmed further. What was left of the day faded from the sky, and the room grew wrapped in shadows. She didn't reach for her lantern. Darkness didn't worry her. She had known it long enough to trust it. In the soft dark, the mill seemed even more alive. Its sighs, its creaks, the way it held the shape of time, it felt almost like a great creature sleeping, breathing deeply in its wooden bones. And she was not alone within it. She never had been. She thought of how many sunsets the mill had seen, how many seasons had passed across its roof, how many snowfalls had hushed its wheel, how many warm springs had brought the scent of wet earth and wild violets through its doors. Each season left something behind, the scent of hay, the pattern of rain on old glass, the golden hush of early autumn. The mill remembered them all, not in words or photos, but in its air, its floorboards, its patient, holding silence. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to listen deeper. The river outside, the soft stir of leaves, the sound of a world winding down. In this place, even her breath felt part of the structure, another sound the mill had learned to carry. For a moment she imagined it again, the wheel slowly turning, water rushing along its paddles. Not loud, not roaring, just working. Steady, strong. She didn't miss the labor, but she missed the rhythm, the quiet purpose, the way the gears had hung. She whispered aloud, a single line she remembered from years ago. Everything moves in circles. She didn't recall who had said it. Maybe her father, maybe the mill itself, but it felt true here, felt true in her bones. Her voice, though quiet, didn't echo. The mill absorbed it, held it gently, like it did everything else. Nothing was lost, it only softened, turned over and over until it became part of the stillness. She stood slowly, her legs a little stiff now. She moved toward the doorway, pausing with one hand on the old frame. Behind her, the shadows had deepened. Before her, the night waited, cool and calm, stars scattered like salt above the trees. Before leaving, she looked once more at the great gear by the window. Its teeth caught the moonlight, dull and weathered, but proud. It hadn't turned in years, but it had turned once, and that was enough. She stepped outside, the night air folding around her. The river murmured its endless path, and her boots pressed softly into the earth. The door closed behind her with the same quiet sigh it always had, like an old friend saying good night. The path home was gentle, lined with soft grass and the sound of crickets. No lantern needed, just the moon and memory. Her footsteps were slow, unbothered by time, the kind of pace you take when there's nowhere to rush. Behind her, the mill stood dark and quiet once more, as if it had never been disturbed, but it had been visited, and that mattered. It had listened again, it had remembered again, and it would hold that memory like it always did. The sky was deep navy now, stars multiplying with each blink. A breeze moved through the tall grass, brushing her coat, carrying the earthy scent of river and wood. She breathed it in slowly, letting it settle in her chest. She passed the old willow tree at the bend, its branches swaying like slow dancers. Beneath it, the ground dipped, slightly a familiar step that her feet met without thought. She could have walked this path in sleep. Maybe she had. Her cottage lights glowed warm in the distance, not bright just enough to say, "You're almost home." She smiled at the sight. It was a quiet smile, the kind that came from deep inside, from long days lived gently. She crossed the gate, the latch clicking softly behind her. Inside, the hearth waited cold, the blankets neatly folded. She moved through her routines without a word, each one stitched into her hands like old thread. She lit a single candle, its flame dancing gently in the stillness. Then, slowly, she sat by the window, looking out over the hill where the mill stood unseen in the dark but not forgotten. Not by her, not by itself. She sipped warm water from a mug and let the weight of the day settle into her shoulders. There was no noise in her mind, no worry, just the echo of gears that no longer turned, and the quiet pride of knowing she had turned them once. When she finally climbed into bed, the cat at her feet stirred only slightly, then curled back into sleep. She pulled the blanket over her chest and let her breath slow, her eyes fluttering closed with the ease of someone held by peace. Outside, the river whispered, the stars blinked, and in the distance, the mill stood silent and strong, resting as it had for years, carrying the weight of time without complaint, without need-only presence. And as sleep took her, it carried her not away, but inward back to wooden beams. creaking floors, soft flower dust, and the deep, grounding hum of a place that had once moved with purpose, and now simply held everything still. The window above the bookshop, where the wooden sign creaked softly in the breeze. A single window glowed with warm, golden light. It was a small room, just enough for one person, a kettle, a desk, and a bed, but it held the presence of hundreds of stories. Outside, the street was quiet. The village had gone to sleep, shutters drawn and lanterns dimmed. But up here, in the room above the books, one lamp still burned, and beside it a woman sat cross-legged in an old chair, journal open, pen in hand. The room smelled faintly of old pages and cinnamon tea. The window was cracked just enough to let in the cool night air, and the curtain moved gently, like it was breathing. The woman's pen moved slowly across the page, not in a rush to reach the end. She wrote for herself, not for anyone else, soft thoughts, quiet memories, fragments of feeling, the kind of words that lived better on paper than in the air. She paused to sip her tea, now lukewarm, but still comforting. Steam no longer rose from the cup, yet it felt warm in her hands. The room was lit only by a single lamp beside the desk, its glow amber and kind, casting soft shadows on the floorboards. A small stack of books sat on the windowsill spines, cracked pages marked with ribbon or dried leaves. They were old friends. They didn't mind waiting. The ceiling above her creaked faintly, though no one lived higher up. It was just the bones of the building shifting into sleep. She didn't mind. She liked the way the room spoke, quiet creaks, the occasional sigh from the walls, the whisper of paper settling. It was the kind of quiet you grew into, the kind that held you without needing to speak. Outside, a branch tapped gently against the glass. Her journal lay open in her lap, half filled with gentle thoughts. She wrote about the way rain smelled on cobblestones, about the sound books made when opened after years untouched. She didn't edit, didn't worry about form. These were not poems or essays, just soft pieces of herself, gathered at the end of the day. Writing, for her, wasn't about remembering. It was about letting go, slowly and kindly. The window framed the rooftops of the village, all dark now, except for a few flickers of candlelight in upstairs rooms. She imagined others still awake perhaps, someone reading in bed, or watching the clouds drift over the moon. There was comfort in knowing she wasn't the only one still held by the night. Not lonely, just still, just breathing, letting the quiet fill in the space where noise used to live. A small clock ticked on the wall, its sound light and even. She never wound it for timekeeping. It was always a little slow, but she liked the rhythm of it, the way it broke the silence gently. She reached for another book, not to read it fully, but to hold it open on her lap. The pages were soft with age, the text slightly faded. She read a single line and smiled. One sentence was enough for now. On the shelf above her desk sat a candle in a glass jar. She struck a match and lit it, the flame catching with a soft pop. The scent was something warm-clothed, maybe a bit of orange. It mingled with the paper and tea, settling into the room like a familiar presence. She leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the stillness wrap around her. The candle flickered, casting faint light on the spine of a journal. She had lived above the shop for nearly a decade. The space had once belonged to the shopkeeper's aunt, who left it filled with books, notes, tiny vases of dried flowers and curtains stitched by hand. Nothing had really changed since then, and she liked it that way. It wasn't hers because she owned. It was hers because she belonged to it. The walls remembered her just as she remembered them. The streets below were empty now. Even the cafe across the square had gone dark. She listened for footsteps, wheels, anything but the world outside had quieted completely. It was a kind of silence she loved most, not absence, but presence. The hush that held things gently. She rested her hand on the window frame, feeling the faint chill of the glass. The night was cool, but not cold just enough to soothe. She thought about writing letters she'd never send, words meant only for the page. To old friends, to people she once loved, to versions of herself that existed only in memory. The idea comforted her. Not everything needed a reply. Some things were just meant to be released, like the breath she let out slowly, now fogging the glass, then fading. She picked up her pen again and wrote only a few quiet lines. A soft creak from the bookcase drew her eyes across the room. The wood was old, and sometimes it shifted when the night grew damp. She liked to imagine the shelves stretching in their sleep, exhaling after a long day of holding so much weight. Her gaze moved across the titles, some classics, some obscure, a few gifted by strangers. She liked the way the spines leaned on each other, like companions. The kettle clicked off in the corner. She had filled it earlier, forgetting she'd turned it on. She rose, slow and deliberate, and padded across the floor in wool socks. The kitchen was small, barely more than a corner, with shelves and a narrow counter, but it held everything she needed. She poured the water into her mug and added a pinch of dried chamomile. The scent rose quickly, wrapping around her. She carried the mug back to the chair and held it close, both hands wrapped round the warmth. She didn't drink right away, just inhaled. Let the moment steep like the tea. There was no need to hurry. She'd learned that long ago. The room would still be here. The stars would still be out. And sleep would come, not because she chased it, but because she'd made space for it. A soft arrival, not a demand. From her chair, she could just see the moon rising above the rooftops, full and a little hazy behind thin clouds. Its light cast a faint glow through the window, silvering the edge of the desk and her open journal. She didn't write again right away. Sometimes it was enough just to sit still and notice the world continuing without effort. The moon did not ask to be seen. It simply rose. A gentle breeze moved the curtain again, slower this time, like the room was exhaling. The flame in the candle danced slightly, but held steady. She took a sip of tea still warm, still fragrant hand, let it settle in her chest. Outside, a night bird called once, a soft, low note that echoed down the lane. She didn't look to find it. The sound was enough. Some things were better left as mystery and moment. She leaned back, eyes drifting toward the bookshelf once more. One book stood out, green cloth cover, no title on the spine. She reached for it without thinking. It opened to the middle, as if it knew where she wanted to begin. A poem greeted her, simple and spare, about rivers and stars and silence. She read it once, then again, then closed the book with a quiet smile. Just enough, not more, not less. A small framed photo sat on the desk, faded at the edges, corners curling slightly. It showed the shop below many years ago, with ivy crawling up the brick and a striped awning hanging low. A handwritten sign sat in the window, "Stories Inside." She ran her finger along the frame. She had loved that phrase. It reminded her that the building itself held stories too, not just in pages, but in its bones. The candle was burning lower now, its wax pooling quietly at the base. She didn't mind letting things run their course, felt right. No need to blow it out too soon. She placed her journal back on the desk, the pen resting across its cover. The pages would be there tomorrow. The stories would wait. She rose slowly, cradling her mug, and walked once more to the window, her breath clouding the glass. The village was silent below, rooftops softened by moonlight, chimneys resting, windows dark. It was a peaceful kind of stillness, not empty, just settled. She rested her forehead gently against the cool glass, her eyes half closed. There was nothing to fix, nothing to finish, just this moment, just breath and quiet. The soft weight of night folded around her like a blanket. She let herself feel held by it. She turned from the window and moved to the edge of her bed, pulling back the quilt one corner at a time. The sheets were cool, but not cold, and the mattress gave beneath her like it remembered her shape. A book rested on the pillow where she'd left it, earlier marked by a sprig of dried lavender. She didn't reach for it just yet. She slid under the covers and laid still, the mug warm in her hands. She placed the empty mug on the bedside table and curled onto her side, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. The candle's light flickered gently on the ceiling, its glow soft and golden, dancing in slow waves like quiet thoughts. She listened to the ticking clock, no longer counting time, only holding it. Her eyelids grew heavy, not from exhaustion, but from peace, from being exactly where she belonged. In the stillness, her mind wandered not far, just gently, like a feather caught in a breeze. She thought of paper and ink, of hidden corners in old stories, of rain tapping softly on bookshop windows. She thought of the word hush, and how it sounded like it meant, not silence, but care, the comfort of quiet. Her body relaxed, every breath slower than the last. The room around her exhaled with her. The candle fluttered once more, then steadied. Its flame had grown low, its light now touching only the foot of the bed. She turned slightly, the quilt rustling softly beneath her. Sleep approached, not as a sudden fall, but as a drift, gentle and slow. Her breathing deepened, her thoughts thinned. The stories would wait. The books would hold her place, and above the quiet shop, the window stayed warm. Somewhere below, a sign swayed gently, its hinges creaking once, then falling still again. It was a sound she'd grown to love, a reminder that the world continued moving even when she rested. The shop below, with its shelves and nooks, dreamed quietly to SROs, waited silently in their rows, content to remain unread for one more night. Books, like people, sometimes just needed to be near someone. Her thoughts became softer, more scattered. Shapes, not sentences. Colors, not conclusions. She felt her body sink deeper into the bed, the blanket growing heavier in the best way. The candle's flame leaned once, then returned. She didn't need to see it to know it was still there. It was enough to feel the warmth against the room, the hush it carried, the permission to let go. She dreamed lightly, slowly, of words drifting like petals, of pages turning in breeze that had no direction, of letters floating gently across water. The dreams didn't tell stories. They simply existed, like clouds passing over a sleeping town, leaving no mark, only softness. In the dream, she walked barefoot through a hallway made of shelves, touching each book like it was a heartbeat. Outside, a soft wind moved down the lane, brushing past doorways and shutters, rustling ivy on old bricks. It passed the shop and its glowing window, then faded into the quiet behind it. The candle flickered one last time before lowering itself. The flame drew inward like a sigh and gently went out, its smoke curling in slow, graceful spirals before disappearing. Darkness settled fully in the room, but not a hollow kind. A full darkness, safe, complete. The kind that held everything gently and asked nothing in return. Her breathing was deep, and even now the clock still ticked. The wind moved softly, and above the bookshop, behind the now dark window, sleep had wrapped itself around her, quiet as paper, warm as light, and lasting through the night. Downstairs, the shop remained still shelves, lined with stories, waiting patiently. The floorboards held the memory of countless footsteps, and the air carried the scent of ink, dust, and dried rose petals. Even in the silence, it felt alive. The books knew how to sleep too. They had their own rhythm, their own kind of rest, breathing quietly in the dark, dreaming of being opened again when morning came. The old register sat beneath the front counter, untouched since closing. Its keys, once clacked and clattered with activity, now rested without complaint. A stack of parchment waited beside it, with a note written in soft handwriting, back after tea. It was always there, even when she was in. The note wasn't for customers, it was for the shop itself. A ritual, a promise to return, even when unspoken. Moonlight shifted across the bookshelves, brushing titles in silver. A tiny gust through the chimney made a whispering sound near the fireplace-like pages, turning on their own. No fire burned tonight, but the scent of wood smoke still lingered in the hearth, a memory in the air. The whole building felt wrapped in time, not stuck in the past, but suspended, perfectly content in its own soft stillness. Back in the upstairs room, she lay without stirring. Her hands were curled gently beneath the pillow, her hair spread across the linen sheet. Her body had let go of weight, of thought, of any need to move. Sleep wasn't heavy, it was light, a drifting above the mattress, held by nothing and everything all at once. The window remained closed now, but a bit of night air lingered like a hush. In her dream, the shop was open not to customers, but to starlight. Beams of moonlight wandered in through the windows, illuminating pages that turned themselves. No voices, no footsteps, just soft paper sounds and the occasional sigh of a spine opening wide. She stood behind the counter, watching, not speaking. It wasn't a dream of doing, it was a dream of witnessing, of simply being near magic. The dream shifted like mist, becoming softer, more abstract. She wandered between shelves that stretched into darkness, each lined with glowing books. When she touched a cover, a sound would play, a bell, a breeze, a quiet laugh. None of it frightened her. It all felt known, as if she'd dreamed it before. The shop in her mind moved like the sea fluid, endless, gentle, filled with pages and peace. Back in the waking world, the room above the shop remained untouched. The candle's wax had cooled into a soft pool, hardened now in the chill of the early morning. The blanket rose and fell gently with each breath. Outside, the wind had quieted. Even the ivy on the brick was still. The village held its breath in that sacred hour just before dawn when the world pauses and everything feels at peace. The clock ticked on, though no one heard it now. It was a kind keeper of time, never loud, never insistent. It simply moved forward, second by second, like a whisper. The pages of the journal remained open, ink dried mid-thought, as if waiting for the next line to arrive when she did. Nothing rushed her here. Not the room, not the hour, not the stories. Everything waited with quiet patience. Outside, the horizon hinted at change. The blue of night had begun to thin, giving way to the softest shade of grey. The rooftops shimmered faintly with dew. Birds hadn't yet begun to sing, but the silence no longer felt completed, held the shape of sound to come, a gentle prelude to waking. The shop and the room above it still rested, but the light was shifting, and the day was near. She turned once in her sleep, just slightly, her hand now resting near the journal's edge. Her face was calm, her brow untroubled. There was no dream left to follow, no thought left to chase, only rest. The kind of deep, unshakable sleep that comes when you are exactly where you're meant to be, wrapped in stories, warmth, and the quiet company of your own stillness. The sky outside turned lighter by degrees. Stars faded behind soft clouds, and the rooftops turned from blue to grey to gold. Somewhere a door creaked open, and the first stirrings of morning began their quiet rise, but the shop below stayed closed, its stories asleep, and above it the window remained dim. No movement yet, no rush. The world knew how to begin slowly, and so did she. Her breathing remained deep and steady, untouched by the changing light. The quilt had slipped slightly from her shoulder, and the cool air touched her skin, but she didn't stir. It was the kind of sleep that held the body in perfect trust-nothing, chasing her forward, nothing pulling her back, just breath and warmth, and the silence of pages that had been turned, then gently closed. The curtain fluttered once more, lifting and falling like the breath of the room itself. The books on the shelves rested where they always had. The mug on the bedside table had cooled completely. All around her, the world was still, but not silent. It was full of presence, of quiet things, keeping watch candle, wax wooden floorboards, the pillow beneath her cheek hole, remembering her exactly as she was. A bird sang, soft and tentative, from a rooftop chimney. Its note drifted across the quiet street and touched the window pane like a knock. She did not wake, not yet, but her breath caught slightly and then settled again. The first sounds of the day arrived carefully, not to break the silence, but to lift it gently, like sunlight parting clouds or the turning of a final page. Below, the bookshop waited in its own rhythm. Its shelves didn't yearn to be filled. Its chairs didn't miss being used. It simply held space for stories, for time, for people. The walls, thick with the scent of paper and wood, did what they always had, cradled the stillness between lines, held the quiet between words, and turned each day into something soft and sacred. The awning outside still bore last week's rain, dried in uneven patches. The shopkeeper's sign remained still in the morning breeze, swaying faintly but making no sound. The door remained locked. It always opened late on Sundays. There were no rules posted, just a rhythm to be honored. Those who knew the shop knew the rhythm, and they waited for it the same way the village waited for light. The smell of rising bread from the bakery drifted through the square now, mingling with the early warmth of sun on stone. The streets began to soften at the edge of shutters. Opened, a broom swept quietly near a door. Someone filled a watering can, and still the window above the bookshop held its golden hush. The room inside had not yet turned toward the day. It stayed with the night a little longer. She shifted slightly beneath the quilt, her eyes fluttering once, then closing again. No need to rise just yet. Her body knew there was still time to rest. The room agreed. Everything inside it moved at the pace of her breath, slow and deep. Her journal waited on the desk. Her story would continue later. Morning didn't demand anything here. It only offered a hand, softly extended. Eventually, she would wake. She would light the kettle, open the window wide, and write again. She would sweep the floor of the shop, dust the shelves, and let in those who came for stories. But not yet. The day was kind, and it waited without knocking. The light in the window grew brighter, but still gentle, casting new lines of gold across the floorboards and books. She dreamed again, just for a moment, of letters floating like feathers, of window panes holding starlight, of a hallway made of soft voices. The kind of dream that slipped away as it formed, never needing to be remembered, only felt. It passed through her like breath, and when it was gone, it left peace behind. The kind of peace that settles when you have been still for long enough to hear your heart. The candle on the desk had long since gone cold, but its scent lingered, faintly clove, orange, and something like comfort. The scent of a memory still unfolding. The room smelled like books and morning now. The kind of room you return to in thought, even when you are far away. It stayed exactly as it was, not out of habit, but out of love for the quiet it offered. Footsteps passed on the cobbled street below, soft, unhurried. A dog barked once in the distance. The day had arrived, but it did not rush in. It entered like a familiar visitor, welcomed without ceremony, and above it all, the room stayed tucked in stillness a little longer, caught in that rare moment where sleep and waking shared the same breath. There was no alarm, no clang, no call to action, only the weight of the quilt, the breath in her chest, the warmth of a bed that knew her shape. She opened her eyes slowly, saw the soft light on the ceiling, and smiled not out of excitement, but from the quiet joy of returning to a life she had shaped gently, one slow morning at a time. She would rise, stretch, begin again. She would step down the stairs and unlock the shop door. She would speak little, listen often, and let the day unfold like a page. But for now, she stayed in bed a little longer, watching light move across her room like a story being told without words, only warmth and patience and grace. And so the window above the bookshop remained still, glowing gold in the early light, a quiet room filled with paper, breath, and rest. A story paused mid-sentence, a candle that had burned itself out in peace, and inside, someone waking slowly to a world she had written herself into line by line, day by day, without ever needing to rush. The bakery at dawn's edge, at the far edge of the village, where the cobbled road gave way to dew-covered fields. The bakery stirred before the world did. Its chimney sent a thin ribbon of smoke into the fading night, and behind its wooden shutters a warm orange glow flickered against the dark. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rising dough and wood smoke. The oven, an old stone giant built into the back wall, crackled softly with a fresh stack of logs. It had been baking bread longer than anyone in the village had been alive, and it did so with quiet pride. Clara, the baker, moved through the quiet space with slow familiarity. Her apron was dusted with flour before the sun even touched the horizon. She didn't need to look at the clock. Her hands knew the rhythm by heart. First the loaves, then the rolls, then the pastries, folded gently like morning wishes. Everything had its place, and nothing was ever rushed. The bakery was a place of patience. She lit 2 lanterns above the work table and watched the warm light settle across the wooden countertop. Outside, the fields were still dark, mist curling around the fence posts. Inside, time stretched long and slow and soft. Clara rolled the dough with even pressure, her palms moving like they were whispering to the bread. She didn't speak aloud. The bakery didn't need words. It needed care. A gentle hum escaped her lips, an old tune, half remembered from her grandmother's kitchen. The sound filled the space like steam rising from tea. She shaped the dough into rounds, then into braids, then into quiet little spirals meant for the window display. The oven cracked again behind her, ready to receive its first tray. Clara opened the door, and heat greeted her like a friend. The tray slid into the oven with a soft scrape, and Clara closed the door gently, sealing in the warmth. She wiped her hands on a folded towel, then leaned on the counter for a moment, listening. The wood crackled, the dough rose. The whole bakery seemed to breathe. It was too early for footsteps or chatter. This was her favorite hour, the time when the world hadn't yet woken, and everything waited in peace. She moved to the front window and lifted the wooden latch. The pane creaked open, letting in the crisp breath of morning. Mist curled through the air like ribbon. The street was still empty, save for one street lamp humming softly and a stray cat curled beneath the bench. Clara rested her elbows on the sill, eyes on the sky. The first hints of light gathered on the horizon like butter spread thin on bread. Returning inside, she passed shelves lined with jars, honey cloves, dried figs, cinnamon sticks, the scents mixed in the air, wrapping around her shoulders like a shawl. She reached for the cinnamon and opened the lid. The smell pulled a smile from her. Some ingredients held memories so strong they spoke louder than words. Cinnamon always reminded her of winters, warm mittens, and quiet laughter. She measured carefully, folding the spice into a new batch of dough, her fingers dusted in flour and warmth. Behind her, the oven let out a soft breath. The first loaves would be done soon. She reached for the kettle and set it on the iron hook above the hearth. Tea would help carry her through the next few hours. She chose chamomile today, something gentle, something to match the mood of the morning. A faint knock echoed from the back door to taps, then pause, then one more. She knew the rhythm well. It was Thomas, the farmer from down the lane, come early to trade milk for fresh bread. She wiped her hands, opened the door, and greeted him with a quiet nod. No words were exchanged, just a smile, a jug of cream, and a warm cloth-wrapped loaf. Some kindnesses didn't need conversation to be felt. Thomas tipped his cap and disappeared into the morning mist, his boots silent on the damp stones. Clara closed the door gently and placed the jug on the counter beside her tea. She poured a small splash into her cup, stirred once, then left the spoon resting inside. The warmth rose up to meet her, both from the mug and from the oven behind. She sipped slowly, her breath sinking with the stillness. The scent of baked bread began to fill the room thick, sweet, grounding. Clara moved to the oven and opened the door with a soft creak. The golden loaves sat proud and round, their tops split gently like smiles. She reached in with practiced hands and lifted the tray, placing it on the counter where the steam curled upward like fog. The warmth kissed her cheeks. The day had truly begun now. She placed the loaves one by one on a wooden cooling rack, listening to the soft crackle as their crusts adjusted to the air. That sound, barely audible, was one of her favorites. It was the bread speaking back, telling her it was done. She ran her hand above them, not touching, just feeling the heat. The room, filled with the scent of butter and earth, glowed gold beneath the soft lantern light. A small clock above the pantry ticked softly, but Clara didn't watch it. She had always baked by light and feeling, not by numbers. She kneaded a new batch of dough on the floured counter, folding it inward with slow, steady hands. Each movement was deliberate, her touch neither hurried nor tired. The dough responded in kind, growing smooth beneath her palms, warm with promise and patience. Outside, the mist began to lift. The village rooftops appeared in outlines, their chimneys dark against the softening sky. A robin landed on the windowsill, chirped once, then flew off again. Clara watched it go, then pressed her thumb gently into the dough, testing its spring. Almost ready, she shaped it into gentle rounds and placed them in their baskets, letting them rest beneath a linen cloth. She moved to the front of the shop, unlocked the door, and flipped the small wooden sign to read "Open Soon." The bell above the frame chimed softly as it swung. She didn't expect a line knot yet. Most in the village knew her rhythm and gave the morning its space. Still, the gesture mattered. It was a quiet welcome, a promise that something warm waited behind the door for anyone who might need it. She returned to the back, poured herself another half cup of tea, and leaned against the counter, eyes on the rising dough. Outside, a few windows across the street blinked to life. Light spilled from curtains, water flowed in kettles. The village stretched and stirred. She liked imagining others in their own routines, socks pulled on slowly, bread toasted, a child's sleepy yawn muffled by a quilt. The next batch of loaves went into the oven with the same care as the first. The fire welcomed them without fuss, a steady pulse of heat that gave back more than it took. Clara closed the door, then turned to prep the day's pastries. Apricot jam, dark chocolate curls, walnut crumble. She lined up her tools, each one with a handle worn smooth by time. Nothing here was new, but everything worked. Flour dust floated in the air like early snow. She folded the dough gently over the filling, tucking the edges with care. These pastries would sit in the front case, catching the first beams of sunlight, their golden tops inviting. She thought about the children who pressed their noses to the glass, choosing the one with the shiniest glaze. She smiled quietly to herself and began brushing them with egg. A breeze moved through the open window, carrying in the scent of the field beyond the green, early sun smell of wet grass and awakening soil. It mingled with the scent of baking bread, creating something that felt like comfort made real. Clara paused to breathe it in. In that moment, she didn't think about what came next. There was no list in her mind, only heat, air, and the soft exhale of morning. The first tray of pastries went into the oven, their folded seams snug with filling, their edges brushed to a gentle shine. Clara wiped her hands, folded the towel, and leaned near the window to watch the light. Sunlight now crept along the tops of hedges and fences. Birds fluttered from rooftop to branch, their wings cutting soft lines through the lifting mist. The world was fully awake, but still calm. The bell above the shop door chimed once. Clara turned, unhurried, and stepped into the front. It was Mr. Lune, the schoolteacher, always the first customer on Thursdays. He gave her a small nod and looked toward the bread rack. "Still warm?" he asked. She handed him a fresh loaf wrapped in cloth. He smiled, left coins on the counter, and stepped out again, cradling the bread like a quiet treasure. More footsteps followed, slow and staggered. Neighbors trickled in, one by one. A mother with 2 sleepy children, an older man in need of rolls for his stew, a young couple whispering over which jam tart to share. Clara moved with grace between shelves and trays, her voice soft, her hands practiced, the bakery filled with low voices and the rustle of paper bags. No rush, just warmth passing hands. By mid-morning, the first wave of visitors had come and gone. The bread rack was half empty. A row of golden spirals glistened behind the glass. Clara took a moment to sit on the stool by the window, her tea now lukewarm, her apron a map of flour and sugar. She liked this pause, the in-between, not the beginning, not the end, just the middle space where everything was enough and nothing needed fixing. Outside, a small dog barked once, then settled near the bench. A cart rolled by, its wheels clicking softly on the stones. Somewhere, a bell rang in the distance. Clara rested her head against the cool window pane. She watched the quiet patterns of the day unfold, the way sunlight touched the brick wall across the street, how the ivy waved in the breeze, how time moved without asking for attention. She stood again and checked the oven. The last tray of pastries had puffed up perfectly aged golden, tops just beginning to crack. She removed the tray and let the scent spread through the room like a ribbon, butter, sugar, and something softly sweet. She arranged them on the display rack with care. Each one looked like a little sunworm, bright, ready to be chosen. No two were quite the same. A child entered the shop with coins clenched tightly in her fist, eyes wide as she approached the counter. Clara leaned down, meeting her with a kind smile. The girl pointed at a cinnamon bun, and Clara wrapped it gently in waxed paper. She gave it to her with both hands. "Still warm," she whispered. The girl grinned, gave a quiet thank you, and skipped out the door, bun held like a secret. Moments like that stayed with Clara. Small exchanges, simple kindnesses passed without noise. They filled the bakery's corners like sunlight collecting on the countertops, oft and lasting. She didn't write them down, didn't need to. The memory lived in her hands, her breath in the way she folded parchment and tied twine. She moved through the space as if everything she touched could remember her. The day continued without fanfare. She stacked cooling racks, swept flour from corners, folded linen cloths. The room was quiet again, but not empty. Each sound knife on cutting board, kettle whistling, door creaking, was a note in a song only the bakery knew, the kind of song that never ended, only paused for breath. Clara hummed as she worked, her voice as soft as the dough she shaped. She pressed her palm into the last batch, watching the imprint slowly rise back into place. Satisfied, she laid each loaf into its basket, covered them, and wiped the counter clean. Outside, clouds passed across the sun, throwing moving shadows on the street. A breeze carried in the scent of lavender from the nearby garden. Clara paused, eyes closed, and simply breathed. The whole moment held still. From the back room, Clara retrieved a small wooden box. Inside were recipe cards written in faded inksum in her own hand, some in her mother's, and a few in her grandmother's looping script. She turned one over slowly, running her thumb along its corner. Apricot scones. She didn't need the recipe anymore, but she read it anyway, as if the words themselves added flavor to the memory of the dough. She set the card aside and began preparing the ingredients. Butter cut into flour, sugar sprinkled like soft snow, apricots diced small and golden. Her hands moved with purpose, but never haste. Each action was part of something larger, rhythm not taught, but remembered. It wasn't just baking, it was caretaking. Each bowl and tray and folded edge was a quiet offering to those who would taste it. The doorbell rang softly, and a young man entered, his shirt dusted with paint. He bought 2 croissants and left with a nod, paintbrushes sticking out of his coat pocket. Clara watched him go, wondering what he would paint today. She liked thinking about where the bread went, who would eat it, and what kind of morning it might brighten. Her baking didn't travel far, but it reached deep. She wrapped the scones in cloth and placed them on the back shelf to cool. The oven was off now, resting after its early work. Clara stood for a moment, hands on the edge of the counter, eyes on the empty trays. There was something satisfying about the quiet that followed creation, the warmth left behind, the way the air held the shape of what had been made. The bakery exhaled slowly with her. Outside, the day had grown full. The street was busier now, but still gentle. Children laughed near the square. A cyclist passed with a basket full of herbs. From the window, Clara watched it all, her tea steeping beside her. She didn't hurry to drink it. The steam rose slowly, just like the sun had hours ago. Everything had unfolded in its own time, and that, she thought, was enough for today. She took her tea to the bench outside the shop, apron still dusted in flour. The wood was warm from the sun, and the breeze carried the scent of bread even out here. She sipped quietly, one hand wrapped around the mug, the other resting on her lap. Across the street, someone swept their doorstep in small, practiced strokes. Life moved slowly in the village, but it never felt still, just calm. A child waved as she passed, holding a small bag from the bakery in one hand and her mother's fingers in the other. Clara waved back. The gesture didn't need words. Most didn't. She finished her tea and leaned back against the wall, letting the sun warm her shoulders. She could feel the gentle weight of the day settling in. The work was mostly done. The ovens were quiet. Everything had found its place. She stood slowly and returned inside, placing the empty cup by the sink. The kitchen held a quiet hum, like it was still remembering the morning. The last of the loaves cooled on the rack, steam barely visible now. Clara wrapped each one with soft cloth and twine, readying them for pickup. Some would go to the cafe, some to neighbors, some to those who paid in stories rather than coins. As she worked, she thought about the first time she'd baked in this kitchen. Her hands were younger then, her movements unsure. The oven had intimidated her. The dough didn't always rise, but over time she learned not from books, but from listening to the dough, the heat, the silence. The bakery had taught her how to wait, how to soften, how to bring things to life gently. She pulled a small notebook from the shelf and jotted down a few thoughts-new ideas. Old memories, the way the scones turned out softer with lemon zest. She didn't write for a cookbook or a reader. She wrote to remember, to mark time. Each note was a little breadcrumb, trail back through mornings like this one. The ink dried as she smiled softly, then closed the book and tied it shut with ribbon. The sunlight shifted through the front windows, now stretching long across the wooden floor. The scent of baked goods still lingered in the air, but it was quieter, now more memory than presence. Clara placed the last wrapped loaf in its basket and wiped down the counter with slow, circular strokes. It was a kind of farewell to the morning. The flour had settled, the fire had cooled, peace remained. She untied her apron and hung it on its hook by the door. The fabric still held the shape of her hands, the rhythm of her work. Her clothes beneath smelled faintly of cinnamon and firewood. She brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and looked round the room once more. Everything in its place. A quiet pride bloomed in her chest, not loud or showy, just the warmth that follows honest effort. Outside, clouds moved lazily across the sky, their shadows passing softly over the rooftops. The village clock struck noon, its chime drifting down the lane like a bell through water. Clara listened without needing to count the strokes. She knew the time by feel, the way the sun touched the window, the way the tea cooled, the way her shoulders settled. It wasn't about numbers, it was about presence. She walked through the shop one last time, straightening a basket here, tucking a corner of linen there. A few crumbs lay scattered on the counter. She left them, not out of neglect, but reverence. The space wasn't meant to be perfect, was meant to be lived in, to carry traces of warmth, of hands and stories, and mornings that had come and gone. The crumbs were part of the song. As she locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, the bell above gave one last chime, then fell silent. Clara stood for a moment, looking out at the square. The bakery behind her held the hush of a task completed. She stepped into the sunlight, carrying only the scent of flour on her sleeves and the softness of a day well spent. The wind shifted gently, and she walked without hurry. She walked a familiar path down the lane, past blooming hedges and weathered fences. A neighbor waved from their garden. A dog barked once, then lay back down. The village wasn't busy, but it moved with purpose, soft, shared, steady. Clara's steps matched it perfectly. Her shoes tapped lightly on the stones, and the rhythm of her walk was like the end of a lullaby fading, but still warm. She paused by the field's edge, where poppies swayed lazily in the breeze. Bees hummed nearby, slow and drowsy with pollen. Clara picked a sprig of rosemary from the fence line and rubbed it between her fingers. The scent clung to her skin, sharp and earthy. She closed her eyes for a moment, holding still. This, too, was part of the recipe, part of the quiet ritual of living a day with care. At home, her cottage windows were open to the breeze, curtains dancing like soft hands in greeting. She entered without a sound, setting her keys in the bowl and untying her shoes. The kitchen smelled like lavender and old wood. She placed the rosemary in a small jar on the sill, its green bright against the pale sunlight. She didn't rush to do anything else. The silence was full and kind. She filled a basin with water and washed her hands slowly, watching flour dissolve into pale clouds. Each rinse was like drawing a curtain closed on the morning. She dried her hands with a linen towel stitched with her initials, then poured herself one last cup of tea, not hot now, but still comforting. She sat by the window where birds gathered in the grass, pecking softly at nothing in particular. The cottage creaked as it settled, echoing the rhythm of her breath. She thought of tomorrow not with urgency, but with quiet assurance. There would be more dough to knead, more trays to fill, more names to greet with a smile, but not yet. Today had been enough. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the light on her eyelids mimic the sun that rose with her and now rested with her too. A breeze carried in the scent of baked earth and herbs. Time passed unnoticed for a while, the kind of time that didn't need measuring, just living. The cup in her hand grew lighter, and the shadows in the room stretched a little farther. Everything felt slower here, but not still, like dough proofing on a counter, nothing visible, yet everything changing. She stood once more, opened a journal tucked on the bookshelf, and scribbled a short line: Thursday apricots, 2 loaves for Elsie. Perfect crust, that was all. No more needed. The pages were filled with such entries spanning years, not stories, exactly just notes. Traces she liked, knowing the bakery's memory lived here too, in pen and paper, in tiny details caught before they faded. Evening began to settle outside. The light turned honey-colored, and long shadows stretched across the walls. Clara drew her shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside once more. She stood on the stoop and looked toward the village smoke rising from chimneys, laughter echoing faintly from the square. She wasn't part of it now, but she had been. Her presence was baked into its rhythm. She turned back toward the door, stepping inside slowly. Behind her, the garden swayed in the soft wind. The door clicked closed. In the quiet that followed, there was no need for sound, just the hush of home, the scent of rosemary, and the sense of having given something to the day. She placed her journal on the table, folded her hands in her lap, and let herself sit in the golden quiet. And as the light faded, the bakery at Dawn's Edge rested too, the fire gone cold, the shelves quiet, the door locked with care, but inside it, all the memory of rising dough, the warmth of shared bread, the touch of flour on hands that shaped morning into something beautiful. And tomorrow it would all begin again, slowly, gently, just as it should. The Lantern Keeper's Night. In a quiet village tucked between 2 sleepy hills, there lived an old lantern keeper named Elliot. His cottage sat at the edge of the path, where the breeze always moved slowly and the stars came out early. Every evening, just before dusk, Elliot would rise from his chair, stretch gently, and begin lighting the lanterns one by one along the winding cobbled streets, humming a tune only the night remembered. The lanterns weren't ordinary. Each one glowed with a different warmth, some golden, some pink, some the pale blue of moonlight. Elliot didn't rush. He lit each lantern with care, whispering a soft wish into each flame, peace to the restless, comfort to the lonely, stillness to the heart. As the lights flickered to life, the village seemed to exhale, settling deeper into the arms of twilight. Children watched from windows, their eyelids heavy. Cats curled tighter in baskets. Bread cooled on sills beside cooling teacups. Elliot's presence was part of the night itself, steady, gentle, sure. The wind softened when he passed. Leaves stopped rustling, as if pausing to listen. Each step he took laid down a trail of hush, guiding the whole village into dreams. By the time the last lantern was lit, tapped the edge of the lake where fireflies played the sky had turned a deep navy, and the moon had begun her slow rise over the water. Elliot sat on the old bench by the shore, watching the ripples catch the light. This was his favorite moment, when everything had stilled, when the world paused between breath and sleep. Tonight, the stars felt closer. They blinked slowly, like they too were getting ready to sleep. Elliot leaned back, letting the night wrap around him. The soft owl call echoed from the woods. He smiled. The lanterns glowed along the path behind him, each one like a heartbeat in the dark. The lake whispered, the air cooled, and everything was okay. Elliot closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. To the quiet hush of the grass, the soft lap of the water, the flicker of distant wings. Somewhere far away, a bell chimed once, low and slow. The sound didn't disturb, it settled. A reminder that time was moving, but gently. No need to keep track, no need to hold on, just float. He rose again and walked the path in reverse, checking each lantern with a gentle glance. None flickered, none struggled. All glowed calmly, like dreams waiting patiently in jars. He passed houses where everyone had settled in, curtains drawn, blankets tucked. Only the faint scent of lavender drifted through the air like a lullaby. As he reached the edge of the village, the trees whispered his name, not loud, just enough to let him know they saw him. He tipped his cap and continued on, past the garden gate, past the bakery's chimney, past the bench where a stuffed rabbit sat every night. Forgotten by day, remembered by the stars. Nothing was out of place. His cottage door creaked like it always did just once, then hush. Inside, everything waited. The worn armchair, the kettle wrapped in a cozy, and a single book open to the middle. He didn't need light inside. The glow from the nearest lantern filtered through the curtains, enough to show the shape of home, familiar, slow, kind. Elliot poured water into the kettle, set it on the stove, and sat. Outside, the night thickened, wrapping its arms around the village like a favorite quilt. He listened to the kettle hum as it heated low and soft, like a lullaby beginning. No urgency, no sharpness, just the rhythm of sleep getting closer, the rhythm of breath slowing. The kettle whistled gently, never loud. Elliot poured the tikka mamile, steeped with mint and let it warm his hands. He took small sips as the quiet folded deeper around him. No clocks ticked here, no footsteps passed, only the creak of the chair as he leaned back, the crackle of settling wood, and the sound of his own breath, steady and slow like the tide. He didn't read the book tonight. Some nights called for pages, others for stillness. He simply sat, watching steam rise from his cup, each wisp disappearing into the hush. His eyes grew heavier. The lanterns outside shimmered gently through the curtains, each one like a hush held in glass. Elliot smiled, knowing sleep was close. There was nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. He stood once more just to peek outside. The village slept, peaceful and wrapped in warmth. Windows dark, doors closed. Even the cats had stopped their wandering. He whispered good night to the wind, who responded with a small, cool kiss on his cheek. Then he shut the door gently and returned to his chair, letting the last sip of tea cool between his fingers. His eyelids drooped, his arms loosened, the cushion beneath him molded just right, familiar from 1,000 evenings before. The lanterns outside would stay lit until morning, their flame steady, their glow soft. Elliot's work was done. His body knew it. His thoughts slowed until they no longer formed sentences, just soft impressions, drifting like feathers. He imagined floating, not flying, just weightless and warm, held by the sky. He imagined curling into the clouds, the way a cat might curl into a sunny spot. He felt the night cradling him. He let go of his breath a little longer. The chair creaked once, as if sighing with him, and then fell still. His tea cooled forgotten, but it didn't matter. Sleep had arrived. Outside, a lantern flickered not. Out, just a soft flutter like a dream shifting. The wind moved gently down the path, checking on doors, tucking in branches. The moon rose higher, bathing rooftops in silver. Stars blinked slower now. The whole village was resting. Even time itself seemed to take a break, pausing between seconds so everything could sleep. In the darkness, soft shapes moved. A moth drifting past a window, a leaf curling deeper on the ground, a dream slipping quietly into a child's mind. All around, the lanterns glowed on, keeping watch. No harsh light, no noise, just the feeling of being held like a hand around yours, like a blanket that breathes. It was a perfect night for sleeping. Elliot, now fully asleep in his chair, breathed in slow rhythm. His hands rested gently on his chest, rising and falling like the lake's surface. The warmth of his final thoughts, something about a younger self, chasing fireflies, lingered faintly. He didn't stir, he didn't dream wild things, just colors, just comfort, just calm that stretched into stillness. And when morning would eventually arrive, the lanterns would quietly dim, knowing their job was done. The village would stretch, the bread would rise, and Elliot would open his eyes slowly, without alarm, but for now, the world stayed wrapped in its nighttime hush. Every heartbeat matched the rhythm of sleep. Every corner whispered rest. So if you ever feel the weight of the day press too hard, imagine Elliot walking down a lantern-lit path, humming softly, lighting one gentle flame after another, each one a little pocket of peace, each one a signal that it's safe to slow down, to soften, to sleep. The lanterns glow, still somewhere, maybe just outside your window, maybe inside you now. The village that slept with the stars, nestled in a wide valley, surrounded by slow hills and sleepy trees. There lay a village called Lune. The roofs were round, the paths were mossy, and every window glowed with a candle after dusk. The village moved on its own time. No clocks, no alarms, just the sun, the wind, and the sound of soup simmering in kitchens as evening stretched into night. As twilight arrived, the villagers began their rituals. Curtains drawn, bread cooled, crickets sang softly outside open windows. In the center of the village was a round square where a fountain whispered and benches held stories. No one spoke loudly. Even the laughter sounded like a yawn. The whole place knew how to rest, and did so with grace. Old May, the baker, always left a candle in her window and a cinnamon roll on the sill for dreams passing through. Tom, the gardener, covered his flowers with soft blankets of netting so the petals wouldn't get cold. A child named Nevie set her stuffed rabbit on the roof each night so it could watch the stars and report back in the morning. The village didn't have street lights. Instead, they had dream lanterns hung from tree branches and porches, filled with oils that flickered blue and gold. They gave off no heat, just warmth, a softness you felt in your chest. Fireflies often came to join them, blinking in slow rhythm as if syncing their glow with the beat of the sleeping town. Down by the stream, the weaver's cat, Bramble, padded softly along the stones, checking that all the loons had stopped humming. Even the water slowed at night, curling gently around stones as if settling in. The stars overhead grew bigger somehow, leaning down just enough to touch the rooftops. The sky watched the village with quiet affection. In one small cottage, an elder named Lune lit a special incense lavender with a hint of smoke and memory. He told stories to the wind, and the wind listened. Tonight, he whispered of a fox who found a bed made of leaves and dreamed of music. The breeze carried his tale across the thatched roofs, through cracks in shutters into sleeping ears. The village clock tower never struck midnight. It only hummed a note once, low and soft, like a lullaby too shy to be sung. That hum travelled through the cobbled paths, up into eaves and down into pillows, curling in beside every dreamer. It reminded them, you are safe, you are warm, and there is nothing you must do now except rest. In the forest, just beyond, owls kept watch, not because they had to, but because they liked seeing dreams drift from the chimneys like steam. They hooted gently now and then, a sound that wrapped around the village like a scarf. In return, the village breathed slowly, as if to say, thank you, we're still here, we're at peace. One by one, the candles flickered out, not from wind, just readiness. A kind of shared sigh among windows and doors. Even the fountain in the square trickled slower, as though it too was dreaming. All that remained were the stars, the lanterns, and the steady sleeping heartbeat of a village that understood the sacredness of quiet. And if ever you pass by Loveland, though few do you might feel it, that softness in the air, that hush that wraps around your thoughts, it stays with you even after you leave, a kind of gentle knowing that somewhere out there the whole village sleeps beneath the stars and waits patiently for you to rest too.